According to his theory, the collective unconscious is shared memory that descendants of a common ancestor can tap into. Gee, that sounds like the exact setup for every Assassin's Creed blast to the past. It's probably why the game named the device that makes it all possible the Animus. It's the Jungian archetype representing our male ancestors and their memories. Looks like some Ubisoft writers were paying attention in their Intro to Psychology class. But where they take liberties, both with Jungian psychology and genetics, is how deep these memories go. Jung believed that the Animus embodies more the ideas and attitudes of the men in our past, not the experiences they lived through. Likewise, there is evidence that our DNA imbues us with memories from before our time, but they're less Renaissance Florence in 1080p and more nebulous urges. Dang it. You might call those instincts, and there's evidence that suggests they can be passed from one generation to the next. Some species of birds can be raised in soundproof isolation and yet will be able to sing their songs as well as birds that were socialized normally. Burrowing mice build remarkably standardized tunnels even if they're raised in captivity and have never even seen sand before. Researchers have crossbred 2 different species of mice that build unique tunnels and were able to pinpoint exactly which genes determine how their tunnels are designed. Natural selection can explain how these types of traits could develop. DNA mutates naturally, either through mistakes in copying or repair. These mutations can lead to mice that have the instinct to build slightly different tunnels, and the mice with the best tunnels won't get eaten by predators as often, so they're more likely to pass on the blueprint. Eventually, their mutation will be the norm, but the process will take many thousands of years. Assassin's Creed seems to think that just one experience can have an impact on descendants far in the future, and as a matter of fact, that's true. Your environment can change your DNA, yes, by mutating it if you live near a local nuclear waste dump, but that's changing the genotype, the physical code of your DNA. Your environment, age, and yes, even experiences can change your phenotype, which is how that code is expressed. Events can switch genes on or off, and the state of that gene can be passed on. Scientists have shown this when they conditioned mice to be afraid of the scent of cherry blossoms. When they examined the DNA in their sperm, they found the section of their DNA that made them sensitive to the smell of cherry blossoms was much more active. Sure enough, the children and even grandchildren of these mice would avoid the scent, even though they had no reason to be afraid. The scientists suggested this may be where irrational fears, phobias, come from. And I bet if there's one thing mice are afraid of, it's scientists. So, based on current research, Desmond can't remember exactly where Altair hid the Apple of Eden, but he should have a healthy distrust of those nice men in the white coats with the Templar crosses. Oh, and he definitely should be afraid of heights. Yes, I know a lot of you asked if landing in hay was a realistic way of
a vast distance in such a short space of time. It raises many questions. How is it they always come to the same place, although they've never been there before? They're the offspring of the butterflies that laid their eggs in the spring. That's what's so extraordinary about the phenomenon. No butterfly ever does the journey twice.
The monarch butterflies are obviously beautiful, but do they actually matter to the ecosystem? They certainly do.
Involved 74 fetuses, correct?
I don't remember exactly how many.
Turn to page 12 of the study.
Yeah, 76.
76.
Mm-hmm.
And these fetuses were all 3 months or older when aborted, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And these were all normally developed fetuses, correct?
Yes.
Okay. These included fetuses that were aborted for social and psychiatric reasons, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What organs did you harvest from these fetuses?
Well, I didn't personally harvest any, but a whole range of tissues were harvested by co-workers.
Okay. And these pieces were then cut up into little pieces, right?
Yes.
And they were cultured?
Yes.
Okay. Some of the pieces of the fetuses were pituitary gland. That were chopped up into pieces to.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Included the lung of the fetuses.
Yes.
Okay. Included the skin.
Yes.
Kidney.
Yes.
Spleen.
Yes.
Heart.
Yes.
And tongue.
I don't recall, but yeah, probably yes.
So I just want to make sure I understand. In your entire career, and this was just one study, so I'm going to ask you again. In your entire career, how many fetuses have you worked with?
Well, I don't remember the exact number, but quite a few when we were studying them originally, before we decided to use them to make vaccines.
Do you have any sense? I mean, this one study had 76. How many other studies did you have that you used aborted fetuses for?
Oh, I don't remember how many.
You're aware? Are you aware that one of the objections to vaccination by the plaintiff in this case is the inclusion of aborted fetal tissue in the development of vaccines, and the fact that it's actually part of the ingredients of vaccines?
Yeah, I'm aware of those objections.
Okay.
The Catholic Church has actually issued a document on that which says that individuals who need the vaccine should receive the vaccines regardless of the fact, and that I think it implies that I am the individual who will go to hell because of the use of aborted tissues, which I am glad to do.
Okay. Do you know if the mother is Catholic?
I have no idea.
Okay.
But she should consult her priest.
If she has if she's in fact Christian, I guess, right? In any event, so we have 76 in this study. Would you approximate it's been a few hundred fetuses?
Oh no, I don't think it was that many.
Okay.
It was probably not many more than in this paper.
Uh-huh.
And I should stipulate that we had nothing to do with the cause of the abortion.
Mm-hmm. Some of these were for psychiatric institutions, correct?
Actually, all I can say is that the fetuses that I personally worked with actually came from Sweden, from a Swedish co-worker, and so I, in no case, was able to determine what exactly the reason for the abortion was.
I'm just asking you, some of the fetuses that you did use did come from abortions from people who were in psychiatric institutions, correct?
I don't know that. What I'm telling you is that I got them from a co-worker, and if it's stated in the paper, it's true, but otherwise I do not know.
Okay, so if it's in the paper, you don't contest it, right?
I don't contest it, no.
Okay. Have you ever used orphans to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Have you ever used the mentally handicapped to study an experimental vaccine?
I don't recollect ever doing studies in mentally handicapped individuals. At the time, in the 1960s, it was not an uncommon practice.
So, you're saying, I'm not clear on your answer, I'm sorry. Have you ever used the mentally handicapped to study an experimental vaccine?
What I'm saying is I don't recall specifically having done that, but that in the 1960s it was not unusual to do that, and I wouldn't deny that I may have done so.
Okay. There's an article entitled Attenuation of RA27.3 Rubella Virus in WI38 Human Diploid Cells. Are you familiar with that article?
Yes.
In that article, one of the things it says is 13 seronegative, mentally retarded children were given RA27.3 vaccine.
Okay, well, then that's, in that case, that's what I did.
Okay. Have you ever expressed that it's better to perform experiments on those less likely to be able to contribute to society, such as children with handicap, than with children without or adults without handicaps?
I don't remember specifically, but it's possible. And again, I repeat that in the 1960s, that was more or less common practice. I've since changed my mind, but that was a long time ago.
Do you remember ever writing to the editor of Ethics on Human Experimentation?
I don't remember specifically, but I may well have.
Okay. I'll mark this. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to hand you what's marked as Exhibit 43. Do you recognize this letter you wrote to the editor?
Yes.
Okay. Did you write this letter?
Yes.
Okay. Is one of the things you wrote, the question is whether we are to have experiments performed on fully functioning adults and on children who are potentially contributors to society, or to perform initial studies in children and adults who are human in form but not in social potential.
Yes.
Okay. It may be objected that this question implies a Nazi philosophy, but I do not think that it is difficult to distinguish non-functioning persons from members of ethnic, racial, economic, or other groups.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Have you ever used babies of mothers in prison to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Have you ever used individuals under colonial rule to study an experimental vaccine?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do so in the Belgian Congo?
Yes.
Did that experiment involve almost 1 million people?
Well, all right. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you ever visit what was the Belgian Congo and Urundi?
Yes.
How many times?
Once.
And we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. We're taking things that are,
genetically modified organisms.
And we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting
the level of horror of what has taken place. For example, did you know that the aborted human baby that was murdered to get these cell lines, the cells that are put into these vaccines, that the mother of that baby was a psychiatric patient? She was insane. So you have the murdered baby of an insane mother infested with cancer cells, replicated for decades since the 1960s, over and over and over again, and then deliberately put into vaccines that touch all of our children. Every child in America is injected with this aborted human fetal tissue cell line. It is the genetic imprinting of our children. Every child that's vaccinated is imprinted with the genetic code for cancer. And the cancer industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And the psychiatric drug industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And remember that some of what's passed on from generation to generation is not just purely genetic, but epigenetic. How to say this? There are elements of the mental illness and the violence of the murder and the suffering of that child that was murdered for his cells. Elements of that continue to be expressed through the epigenetic factors of these genes that are injected into your children. You wonder why we've had this explosion of cancer and mental illness and insanity and suffering and just craziness in our world for the last couple of decades? Why does it keep skyrocketing? Guess what? Everybody is being injected with mental illness, with hatred, with violence, with murder, with aborted babies, with cancer genes. It's all part of the plan. Folks, this is what I've been trying to warn you about. This goes way beyond medicine and health. This is an annihilation agenda for humankind, which is why they are pushing these vaccines with mandatory immunization programs in places like California and all around the world. They insist that you infect your children and that you are infected with cancer viruses, with hatred, with
ups with me as far as, resisting. I think people really need to understand what the deeper significance of what they're talking about. When they're talking about testing for COVID, it is actually a blood harvesting, and it's going into the quantum supercomputers. They are running post-crime and pre-crime, as well as this came out about 2 weeks ago. They said, well, we got the blood anyway, so we are going to go deep into your family history. That has all sorts of ramifications because HIPAA laws have been suspended. Actually, the Constitution has been suspended, and I could spend hours going into that. The second thing is that there are 48 different vaccinations. They contain aborted fetal tissue. They contain humanized mice. What is a humanized mouse? It is a mouse that has human organs, human blood, human immune system. It's basically a mouse in a human in a mouse suit. And then they take human proteins and put it into the vascular system of plants. And then, so it's like a hybrid human plant. And they're going to mix all this in a blender with a little CRISPR. And they're saying that this is going to keep us safe from the pathogen. The last one